Hello, everybody. I'm very happy to have with us a passionate educational expert. Right now, we have with us Mr. Vignesh Krishnan. Let's listen to him. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Subhoji. I think lovely to be here today. I'll just start with a quick introduction and share a little bit about my growing up days and my career, and I'll also share, what I'll be talking about through the rest of the time that we have together. So I grew up in the southern part of India in Kerala, and spent most of my life in different parts of Kerala. My dad used to work in a transferable job. After my grade 12, I took an unconventional decision to not go to a traditional college. So decided to design my own learning and pursue a range of things. Of course, ended up taking an undergrad degree from a distance learning program, but also ended up doing a bunch of things like screenwriting, photography, started volunteering in a small nonprofit. So that was the beginning of my sort of career after my grade 12. And I remember I just started working with practicing company secretary. I'd studied corporate laws as well as part of multiple things that I had dabbled with. And I was sitting in a cafe and I was walking back home from the cafe and I saw this poster that said, "Are you ready for a challenge? India needs its brightest and the most promising minds to solve its biggest problem." And that got me very interested. Wanted to know what that was. Was it a cool ad? And what exactly was it? So I went back home to look at that. It said Teach for India. So I went back home. This was early days for Teach for India. Nobody knew what the program was, what it was about, etc. So I went back home and I looked up into the website and I realized that it was a 2 year fellowship program where really the endeavor was to bring people from diverse backgrounds, young professionals straight out of college, and also professionals who are working in the corporate or other sectors to switch to the development sector. So, the 2 years, what you get to do is you will be assigned to work in a government school or a low resource school in one of the three cities which used to be there during those days in 2010 and 11. And the intention was to bring people who would have never thought of education as a sector in their life. To kind of just get them. So essentially, the bigger problem that you were trying to solve as part of the organization was while there are hundreds of NGOs that are out there, but most of them are essentially solving the problem. But a critical gap, though, is the talent crisis. So you have the top 10% of talent typically working in the corporate sector or in medicine, or if you think about legal profession, you have the top 10% of talent working there. But that's not essentially the case in the development sector, wasn't the case many years back. And that was the intention of building Teach for India. So I ended up joining there. It was a long, rigorous process to sort of get in. I moved from the south to the north to Delhi, taught for 2 years. I think those 2 years was quite life changing. I thought third and fourth graders. Those third and fourth graders are now 21-year-olds now. Most of them were completed college. It was quite an eye opening experience because I have never had gone to a school which was lacking that level of resources where kids who were in grade 3 were struggling to read at a grade 1 or even below that. So that was the kind of inequality that existed in the schools that I was basically working in. And those 2 years really taught me a lot of valuable lessons. Post those 2 years, I decided to stay with the organization, spent about 9 years with the organization, moved out of the organization, moved to London to do a master's in education, was fortunate to get the British High Commission's Chevening Scholarship, and which also mandated that I had to come back to the country and serve the country again. So I rejoined the organization and spent another 4 years with the organization until early 2024 before I moved to another organization by the name Christel House International, which basically runs a network of high quality free schools for children from socioeconomically disadvantaged backgrounds in 5 countries. And my role essentially, is positioned to kind of just support the organization in expanding their work to newer countries. So that's a little bit about my career and my journey so far. I thought for the purpose of this podcast, I was thinking a lot about what would be valuable that I can potentially share, and I realized that one of the things that I've done in the last 12 years is really interact with probably over 1,000 to 2,000 young adults that I have interviewed and sort of gotten an opportunity to get them on board to be part of the social impact space or have interacted with them in multiple capacities.
Hmm.
And one of the things that I keep getting all the time is that, what are some foundational sort of principles that we need to keep in mind before entering the career? So I thought I would probably share about 9 to 10 key learnings that I have from the last 12 years of my career.
Go ahead. Please don't stop. Go
Great.
ahead.
Perfect, perfect, perfect. No, I thought you had something to ask. So,
No, no, no.
base
I'm listening. I'm listening. I want to know those 10 things. Please go ahead.
wonderful. First, really, and I'll try to keep it short and also try to share some relevant examples. One is really one of the things that I tell young people who are interested in getting into the development sector is that finding your purpose. Most people in their college, you're often told that look for the job that pays you the best paycheck, or like get into the company that's well known. But very few people, and I'm sure this conversation is a lot more popular these days when people talk about passion and purpose. But if you're able to sort of identify your purpose early on in your career, I think that's just so pivotal. I know it's not easy to find, and getting closer to understanding why you want to do what you want to do is something that's not easy at all, right?
Can I just interrupt you here?
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
I didn't have to find my purpose. I People told
yeah.
me that you are born to teach. and, and I just want to
But
share
that's,
with
but
I just want to
I know,
share with you an example because it's so
yeah,
illustrative that I was born to teach. Okay. I
right.
did have a teaching job in a university and I quit that in 1988 and became self-employed. I was not teaching anywhere. I was on an international flight in the year 2000, and we were, just chatting with the seatmate. And then after some time, he said, "Are you a professor?" I said, "No." He says, "Then why do you talk like one?" So it was clear that I could get rid of it. There was no need to identify the purpose for me. It was like, there it was right from fifth grade or so. So sorry to interrupt, but these things are sometimes personal. So anyway, go ahead. I'm sorry to interrupt.
No, that's super helpful. In fact, I was about to say that sometimes you sort of end up doing something and then you realize this is what you're born to do, and that's what you're sort of like, I mean, that's so ingrained in who you are, right? So I was about to tell a story of my grandfather, like back in 1930s. My mom's father moved to one of the tribal villages in the northern part of Kerala from the southern part of Kerala, and it was one of those villages where hardly any folks from outside of that village really came in, and he spent close to 3 to 4 decades there. And during his second, third decade, while he was sort of gotten used to the lay of the land and what really was that place and started falling in love with that place, he also realized that he had to set up things that the village did not have. So he was the first one to set up a cooperative bank, a road, and a post office in that village. But then when you realize that, and there's this interesting anecdote that my mom keeps talking about, how he realized that no one was using the post office in the early years because nobody knew how to write. Right. So he decided that he would write 50 letters every weekend, uh, just to make sure that the post office is not shut. So apparently this conversation that the post office is going to be shut because there are no letters coming in, right? And he had that vision to basically say, you know what, if I continue to do this even in my lifetime, I'm going to and get a critical mass of people to read and write. It's going to flip. the entire equation, right? And he set up a school there, which is now a government school. But that story keeps, reminding me of how a lot of smaller things that you do consistently, also towards something bigger. You may not be able to see that immediately, but also over a period of time, you get to see the ripple effects of that. I think that's one, right? And second big lesson is really what I call as the inner game, and it's a term that is widely used in the tennis field as well. I think the journey of most people who want to get into the development sector most often think of solving a problem that they feel that should not exist, be it poverty or problem in education or air pollution or you name it, and there's an anger towards why does this problem exist and I want to solve it. And most often when you get to solving that, you realize that there's little that you know, and the journey of solving that problem starts with self, right? And which is a big awareness that I had. I remember my first job as an elementary teacher in Teach for India, teaching in an urban slum, realizing that 90% of the things that I wanted to do, I had no idea of. And that was a big realization that I had to go through a whole process of unlearning, because what you are told in your college or school is so different from real life, right? So to me, I think that is the second sort of big part of what I call as really like working on your inner game, and like they say in tennis that your outer game sort of depends on how you play your inner game. And I think that's so critical. I think that stuck with me forever. That I keep telling a lot of young people entering the sector that start with self. As much as it's important to think about what is the problem that you want to work and how are you going to solve it, etc., it's important to also just be a lot more grounded to say, what do I need to do? What do I need to sort of shift internally to be able to solve that and do that better? So that's really the second one for me. I think the third really is, most often what I see in the early stages of the career for a lot of young people is they're stuck to what they are told either in college or by their parents, that this is what you need to be doing, and sort of there's a defined sort of a profile that's given to them, and a lot of their actions and endeavor towards finding a job or an experience is towards what they're told they're good at. And and the first few years of your career is the best time for you to experiment. You don't really have a lot of baggages. You're not married, you don't have a family, and that's the best time for you to like really experiment and push yourself out of your comfort zone. Especially in the development sector, there are actually quite a lot of opportunities, right? Like, I mean, the fellowships when I joined were probably one or two, but now there are about 200 plus fellowships, all of which are very interesting. I mean, there are fellowships for every other, SDG goals that you can think of. For any sustainability goal that you take, there will be some fellowship out there. And all of these fellowships are interesting because it pays you, it gives you an experience to sort of, you know, innovate within a specific framework. It will also give you the right set of trainings. For example, Teach for India is such a great opportunity, or the Young India Fellowship, or even the Gandhi Fellowship. These are all great platforms where you're not only learning something, but also you're getting paid to learn something and do the work. So I would just say that like really pushing yourself out of the comfort zone. I think one of the things that I ask during a lot of interviews is, is the opportunity going to make you fail? I mean, are you sure? Do you know whether the opportunity is going to make you fail and fall and learn? Versus, like, are you just so confident that you're going to ace it from day one? If that's the case, then there's something off in terms of what you're choosing to do. So I think that's the third sort of one for me. And then the fourth one is something that I learned later on in my career is just building networks early on. And how networks are so pivotal in today's world, especially in terms of the opportunities that you get, in terms of the social capital that you build, and also in terms of really moving upward in your career trajectory. Networks play such an important role. And I often say this to a lot of college kids that build networks at an early age. And the best way to do it is volunteer. You don't need to volunteer necessarily for a nonprofit, but you just volunteer or intern and do that actively right from high school itself. And I take this example of one of my good friends who was a couple of years younger to me. When I was doing my fellowship, she was hardly 18, had just passed out of high school, and decided to volunteer. She was the first ones to volunteer in my classroom, and decided to come religiously every week for a couple of days, couple of hours, taught kids dance and arts because that's what she was good at. And fast forward, that was such a game changer for her. She built the network, got into the fellowship herself several years later, founded her own organization, found the sort of initial sets of people who would back her for her social impact organization, went to Oxford to do a public policy program. But in her own trajectory, one of the things that I see which is so powerful is how from the age of 17, 18, she very strategically thought of which are the places that I need to be, and which are the experiences that I need to be, so that like I'm able to build that network early on. And most of it, I think people don't spend that time. I think whenever there's a holiday or a summer break in college, the tendency is, you either at home or you're going on a holiday, which is great, but also like how do you also spend your time a lot more constructively so that it has an effect on your career in the short term and in the long term as well. So that's really the fourth one for me in terms of what one could potentially do in the early days of their career. I think the fifth one for me is just really understanding the lay of the land, right? Which is a question that I get a lot is what are the career options in the impact space? And most people think that you just have to volunteer, paise nahi milta hai, you basically just be in the space and you hardly get any money. It's not true. It's a big myth that people have that the development sector or the impact space does not have money. That's not true at all. Those gone are those days. There used to be a time 15 years back, but not true anymore. I was sharing this data with somebody recently that just the corporate social responsibility funds that comes to nonprofits year on year, from Indian nonprofits to Indian private companies to nonprofits, is roughly to the tune of 60 to 65,000 crores every year. So it's a huge volume of money that's coming in, which means that the opportunities are sort of growing every year. There's a lot of foundations that are investing, like the Gates Foundation and the Dell Foundation and several other foundations are coming in as well. So money wise, there is definitely money out there that's there in the sector. But just broadly, the question has always been, what are the domains to look at? How do we really think about career in the impact space? And I actually categorize it into five segments. One is you could work in multilateral organizations. So multilateral organizations, typically you can categorize them as the equivalents of like the World Bank, the UNICEF, or the UN organizations. And all of these are not easy to get in. They require a certain level of networks to build, and also you need to also have the right skill sets to be able to get there. But several of them offer young professional programs. For example, World Bank has a young professional programs that is very popular. So for a lot of people who are in their final year of college or even in their first year of their work, can really look at applying to multilateral organizations. Multilateral organization, needless to say, opens a lot of doors, right? Like right from day one, you will be traveling, you'll be working on high stakes projects. Just gives you a very unparalleled exposure altogether. Then the second one is just grassroots organization, right? Now, these are grassroots organizations, typically a smaller nonprofits that operate in tier two, even in tier one cities as well. But mostly, if you want to get into grassroots organizations, the best way to do it is to go to a tier two or a tier three town and really look for credible grassroots organization that's solving important problems in the development sector. So grassroots organization is the next one. I think for a lot of people who are mostly grown up in the city and want to understand India better, working in grassroots organization is something that's going to give you a great sort of a launch pad to say, what is really this problem firsthand, and how are people experiencing this, and how do I make sense of that problem, and how do I solve that problem? So grassroots organization is the next route to look at. I think the third segment really is urban nonprofits, which has very structured interventions and programs. Most of these urban nonprofits work like corporates. They have a structured team, structured program, structured training, which probably may not be the case with grassroots organizations, right? Like, so, in the organization that where I currently work, Christel House, or the previous organization that I worked, Teach for India, they're great examples of organizations that work in a very structured way, operate at a certain level of professionalism and ethics that, like you will have very clear career trajectories laid out, great policies, great compensation, all of that, right? And then the fourth one really is impact consulting firms like the BCGs and the Samagra, or there are new ones like GDI partners that are emerging. And typically, all of these impact consulting firms, what they do is they try and tackle large scale issues and work closely with the government. So, for example, it could be really thinking about how do we increase farmer income in a particular state. So, a particular state government would be inviting institutions like Samagra to say, can you look at what are the current schemes that we have? Can you look at the data of the farmers, really the income that they're currently generating? What can we do to better their income over let's say, a 4 to 5 year period? And that's a big problem that typically these impact consulting firms would be solving for. And then, if all of these routes are not what one wants to get in, there is always the most difficult route, which is basically the civil services. You write either the central or the state civil services examinations and go through the bureaucracy. I think that's another route and the great way to get into the social sector and serve people or work on critical sets of problems.
Yeah,
So that's really, yeah.
yeah.
I
Let me add that there are young people who are treating it as a startup space.
Yeah,
They are forming their own entities.
that's right.
Some of
Yeah,
them are
that's
not, so they are like startups. Most of them don't
correct.
expand. But I've heard so many young people who say, look, I'm starting this, I'm doing this, I'm starting this. And the problems they are looking at are not, let us say, unknown. They're looking
Yeah,
at known problems, but they've carved out a space where there's nobody.
that's right.
Okay.
That's right.
So
Yeah,
though the number of people, as you rightly said, has increased so much in the impact space, you can call it, but still there is a strong desire in many people to identify where the gap is.
yeah,
And
yeah,
one
yeah.
thing that I've heard frequently, well, I would say frequently, I've heard often, is the issue, especially from the women, menstrual hygiene. And
That's right.
there
Yeah,
is no, they don't find any large group that is trying to improve and to do something about it. Though one IAS officer wrote that, well, in UP class 9, 10, 11, whatever, something like that, we teach the girls and it's part of the curriculum. But
right.
curriculum aside, not every girl goes there, and there are lots of women who are not actually able to afford the
That's
pads. So there are there are enough young women who are saying, look, we want to manufacture them and we sell them. That's not the only one. There are several I've heard who have come up with the innovative ideas of their own. They are not really able to expand.
yeah,
Because
yeah,
there's no incubation center for nonprofits.
yeah.
Actually, that's the point I wanted to. I mean, I'm hearing you. I wanted to make this point. But there's no incubation center for nonprofits, and there's no
Right, right.
platform by which nonprofits, small, coming
Right.
up from the youth
Right.
meaning under 25, that they
Yeah.
are able to communicate with each other. There is no platform that,
Right.
look,
Right. Right.
this I'm doing this in this my city, and is there any interest? Can I do something? I think there needs to be a platform or an incubation for the energy and motivation of these people. They are not solving a problem that is unknown. They're solving known problems. But they are, like, one fellow is sitting in Uttarakhand. Now,
Yeah.
Uttarakhand, so he's kind of isolated from the mainstream because people don't really know a thing about Uttarakhand. I mean, they know more about Uttarakhand only on their, religious destinations. And Masuri, because Missouri, Dehradun, outside that, they don't know. Right?
Yeah. Yeah.
They have
Yeah.
no interest also
Yeah.
outside
Yeah.
these
Yeah.
places. So, but there are people who are trying to do it. This is why, since you're talking, in very general terms, I thought I'll bring this up that there is a hidden nascent startup, as we see in the for-profit, it's also in the non-profits. And there's no
Right.
incubation center.
That's right. That's
Right?
right. That's
For
right.
the non-profits, I mean, yes, we have the big ones which started small but have become big.
Yeah.
Okay. But there are still so many more, and there needs to be some kind of a way of coordinating their activities. I'm just thinking loud, hearing you. It's not something prepared speech. Okay. All right,
No,
let
no,
me
I hear
stop.
you.
I've
Yeah.
heard enough. I've said enough. Please go ahead.
Huh. No, you're absolutely right. I think that's another route that young people can potentially think of. In fact, in the last few years, specifically, Subhoji, there's a lot of new organizations that have come in which are interested in incubating young nonprofits, right? Um, I mean, of course, everybody, especially the nonprofit world, because of just the sheer volume, there is always a resource constraint. So which means that, like there's always, there are more people fighting for lesser resources. So because of that, the number of incubation that needs to typically happen, of course, probably aren't happening. But definitely, I think that's something that's come up a lot more. Even the big ones like the Asim Premji equivalents are thinking a lot more intentionally to say, how do we support a lot more younger nonprofits in the grassroots versus continuing to support bigger organizations that
Yes,
are getting all the bugs.
yes, yes, yes,
Um, so
yes.
that's something that's available. And in fact, even within Teach for India, we actually used to do this program, and we continue to do this program called Innovated, which is a 9 month incubation for young people who have completed the fellowship and are alumni and want to start organizations or have started organization but haven't really gotten the launch pad. So it teaches you all sorts of skills from fundraising to thinking about how do you hire a team, to thinking about how do you look at your theory of change. What would the organization's vision mission look like? A strategic plan for a 5 year, 10 year period look like, so on and so forth. And then it also gives you a small grant to
Mhm.
sort of make sure that at least during that 9 to 12 month period, your basic sort of needs are taken care so that you can focus on really building your brand, building your organization from the ground up. So that's another route for sure. Like, I mean, thanks for actually just bringing that up, because social impact or social enterprises or starting nonprofit organizations is also something that is such a great sort of way to penetrate into the sector and make a dent. So that's one. And the sixth one that I wanted to talk about is also just really being able to aware. I mean, being aware of like key skills that are critical to thriving in the sector. What I have learned over the years is that there are most of the skills, I mean, which is true across sectors, but specifically in the development sector, most of the skills are transferable in nature. And so the real sort of work lies in thinking about what are those critical skills that one needs to pick up at a foundational level, and then maybe one might come with their own niche and sort of build expertise in that, but also kind of just you marry that with a set of basic skills that are so important to thriving in the sector. So, for example, I keep talking about how research and data analysis is so important, irrespective of whether you work in education, livelihood, health, sanitation, any of these areas. Communication is such an important one because you're not communicating with one type of stakeholder, but there is always a need to interact with multi-stakeholders. And when you're interacting with multi-stakeholders, just your ability to customize your communication, really thinking intentionally about what do I communicate, how do I communicate, how do I make sure that I'm able to sort of pitch what my organization is doing, what is the problem they're trying to solve. And then one of the most, widely sort of looked at skill by most organizations is fundraising. And a lot of people think that fundraising is just going and asking money, but there's just, many things to fundraising as a skill. And it is the most, sought after skill, but unfortunately, not many people are really interested, or, it is not something that is easily available across, right? Like, so that's the other one. And then beyond, all of that, if there is one area that you can specialize, that will give you an edge over, like most other people. So, for example, if you're a techie wanting to get into the sector, it might be useful to think about how do you use technology to really look at solving some of the problems, what is the approach that you need to take, but of course, marry that with some of the important skills that the sector really needs. So most often, like all of these skills are fairly transferable. I think for a lot of young people entering the sector, what's important really is, which is also my next one, is developing your, or rather designing your yearly, what I call as a yearly development plan. So something that I used to tell my team that when you start the year or any time in the year, think about at least five things that you want to put together in terms of your learning plan. And you don't need to religiously follow it to the T and like beat yourself, but at least have that in the paper and say, these are the five things that I want to sort of work on both at a personal, professional level, and really just have an accountability partner to be able to, just sort of do that. And that development plan can encompass a combination of things. It could be the books that you want to read. It could be a learning experience that you want to seek. It could be a bunch of people that you want to talk to, or it could be a short course that you want to do online, or it could be a side gig that you want to start to basically say, this is something that I'm interested in. Let me basically start and really build my niche area there. So the development plan becomes an important tool really to kind of, really continuously sort of be aware of what am I working on and what is that is exciting me to learn on a regular basis. So that also just gives you an opportunity to go back to the drawing board every few months and say, okay, I've made progress or I have not made progress. What I see with a lot of young talent is that like they get into a job and then there's an annual review that comes in and then they are told that, oh, you're not performed well. Nobody really tells you in the middle because giving feedback on a regular basis is not a system that is widely witnessed in many organizations. There are very few organizations that says, okay, let me actually just sit with you and give you feedback. So what that does is there are folks who are in the job in the same role for 3 4 years suddenly realizing that the new changes has come in the organization and they are not really upskilled themselves. I think to not fall into that trap, a better way to think about it is that can you craft your own development plan on a regular basis without somebody else telling you that this is what you need to learn or do, and kind of just marry that with what the organization wants as well. So I think that's the seventh one. I think the eighth one to me is, you know, this is a lot more sort of a lot more micro in terms of what I've observed is really prep and work ethic, right? Like, I mean, I see with a lot of young people entering the sector that like just sheer lack of prep before they show up to a space, right? Like, and a sheer lack of prep in terms of not just when they show up to an interview, but also when they're showing up to a conversation, when they're showing up to a meeting, all of that, right? Like, and for example, for a job, recently I was talking to one of the students that I had the fortune of teaching 13 years back who was looking for a job, and I was telling her that, have you read up everything about the company and the founder? And she said, yeah, I've done that. And I was asking her, do you know that the founder does a podcast? And she said, oh no, I didn't know about that. So I said, you need to read about the founder. Go and watch one of the podcasts of the founder. You will know what their thinking is, what their interest is. And the other thing that I typically do during interviews is I flip the sort of model and ask candidates that, do you have any questions? And it's funny that 9 out of 10 times the candidates' questions are very much like underwhelming, right? Like, so they would ask you a question like, what's the work hours? Or like, I mean, how many leaves do I have? Versus, what is the learning opportunity? Or or rather, what how does organization treat career growth? Or for that matter, like, what is the organization strategy to grow? None of those, right? Like, it's very much like, focused on what's the most important thing in my head versus like having really thought through what questions can I really ask. And I actually say this to people that, like, you might be surprised that the questions that you ask are going to definitely have a lot more impact than the responses that you give to the questions that they ask you. Because when you ask questions, it also talks about what do you care about as an individual. And it also talks a lot about, like, I mean, what are the dimensions that you are thinking about? So I think that's another one that I basically say, yeah.
I sometimes tell young people that, go a little bit beyond your this one step. You ask questions. I say, listen, you are the person they are interviewing. But if you can get control of the interview, you are in.
Yeah, yeah,
If
yeah,
you can
totally.
find a way to get control of the interview, meaning
Yeah,
you
yeah.
direct the conversation,
That's
right?
right. That's right.
It's a very tough thing to think, but instead of just asking questions, let them ask questions which you want them to ask.
That's right. That's right.
Get
Absolutely.
control of the interview. Don't be sort of a person like a lamppost. Okay, what's next? Okay, say, find a way to, because they are also bored and tired of interviewing so many people. If you can
Yeah.
spark your way into them saying, okay, all right, I'll answer your question, right?
Yeah. Totally.
Then you have control. But it may not be that uh, blatant. It may be subtle. But please try to get some control over the interview, the flow, so that they.
Yeah.
Okay, anyway, enough of talk from me. Please continue.
You're absolutely right. I think it also stems from how much of prep that you do, right? Like in terms of how do you respond to something, and sharing this tip with the same student that think of yourself as an interviewer and think about what questions would you ask, right, like to the person, and then come up with a list of 20, 30 questions, respond to it yourself, and then think about if you were to respond in this way, what would be a follow-up question that they would potentially ask. And then that's where what you said in terms of anchoring the interview sort of comes in there, because if you're really prepped and if you're thought through it so well, you know what is going to come next. So you are kind of just indirectly driving the conversation from your end. So that to me is the eighth one. And the ninth one is, like a very technical sort of an input that I thought that I could share is where do you look for opportunities in the development sector? What really are the platforms that are available? So I basically thought of these three, four broader platforms to look at. One is, of course, one is called the Dev Jobs. So Dev Jobs essentially has a set of openings always kind of listed throughout the year for across domains in the development sector. So Dev Jobs is one. Second is Arthan Careers, which is a very India-based organization, Delhi-based organization that does interesting work in terms of like working closely with nonprofits and also the social impact sector at large to source opportunities across thematic areas. Then there is always LinkedIn. I think in LinkedIn, it's important to really build a strong profile, be a lot more intentional about where you're spending your time, the kind of people you're interacting with, so on and so forth. Shortlist is also a good one. Shortlist has some good opportunities, especially for mid-career folks. And then NGO jobs is another one. There are actually several other platforms, but these are the four, five bigger ones that potentially people can look at to keep themselves updated in terms of what's happening. Even there's a lot of grant opportunities that are listed in these platforms as well, especially for people who want to start something. There's always some of the other international grant opportunities that keeps coming in. I think the last one, Subhoji, for me is really what I say is that, like, irrespective of all of these frameworks, the question that one needs to ask is, am I finding joy in what I'm doing? Right? Like, I mean, if you are not finding joy in what you're doing, you can do all of this planning, but it's not going to give you that energy because while there's money in the sector, uh, if you were to compare it equivalently with another sector or for that matter, working outside of India, it is not, what you get is not going to be driven by money, right? Like it's going to be a lot about meaning and joy. And, the earlier you sort of pick that up, you will sustain in the sector because although the sector is emotionally draining as well because you're getting exposed to the problems firsthand. It's not a technical fix like working in a tech company and solving a problem, but you're getting exposed to problems firsthand, which also sort of, while intellectually you can think of solutions, but emotionally it's not easy to sustain. So unless and until you derive joy in what you do, I think it's not going to be easy. So I think early on it's important to ask yourself, am I in the right place? Is this giving me the joy? Do I have the right community to sort of support me? But yeah, that's the 10th and the last one from my end. And I thought that this would be a good set of initial frameworks for people to think about when they look at development sector and what they can potentially do.
Well, thank you so much. This is, I think, a very good tutorial on the options and availabilities. And it also shows where India has come. The big change, as you said, 15 years ago, there wasn't the money, there wasn't the scholarships, there
Yeah,
weren't all this. So it's actually also new. And the young people have nowhere to turn to because the older generation didn't go through it. They have
that's
really
right.
no space they have really no feel for what is going on, right? Because even Teach for India, as you said, in 2010 was very basic, which is barely
Yeah,
14 years. So the older generation has no feel for it. And
that's right. Yeah,
they need to, the young people have nowhere to turn to, and even their professors, they don't know any of these things, right? Because they didn't
yeah.
come to this, the parents also don't know. So it's very important that you have given us a very good tutorial on it. And it's a great pleasure to listen to you. Anything else you want to add here?
No, nothing. I mean, it's been lovely being part of your platform and, happy to get in touch with folks who are interested, who are your viewers, who are interested to sort of learn or, like, I mean, if they
Well,
want to
okay.
connect with me, happy to.
Sure, wonderful. Let's end it here because I do have a few minutes before the next person. I want to talk to you offline because
Yeah,
I have only a few minutes left before the next person. So let's
sure,
end this here, and I want to keep this dialogue between you and me going, but let's discuss
definitely.
that offline. Okay, so I'll be back with another young person or an expert soon. Till then, bye everybody.